My name is Adam Karpafronius, and I work here at the Foundation Memorial to the Murdered Jews of Europe. And welcome to all, especially to all our new guests, and to Cameron, who is here for the third time this year, or in the last 12 months, for the third and final part of his lectures on Nazi killing methods. I'm very much looking forward to this. In the first part of your lecture, you talked a lot about the origins of Nazi killing methods and of poison gas use. And today we are going to connect all these dots to go geographically. So what does the T-Fear euthanasia project have to do with Belzec and Sobibor, and what do the murder of psychiatric patients in Minsk have to do with Poznan and all that with Auschwitz? So that's what Cameron is going to talk about, and also about the perpetrators and a lot of connections there. So we are very much looking forward to it. And I think the floor is yours. Afterwards, we will have the possibility to ask him questions. And so we'll stick around a bit afterwards. Okay, thank you.
This is the third and final lecture on the Nazis' use of poison gas in their killing programs and the general methods they used. In the first lecture, I talked about the unknown origins of Nazi killing ideas and methods. In the second lecture, I talked about the relatively unknown use by the Nazis of gas vans. In this third lecture, I want to talk about the how and why the Nazis came to use different killing methods, and what this tells us about actually the Nazi killing programs. The Nazis murdered between 17.4 and 18 million people during the Second World War. Approximately 3 million Soviet POWs, 6 million Jews, 5.7 million non-Jewish Soviet civilians, 1.8 non-Jewish Polish civilians, up to 250,000 mentally and physically disabled, 312,000 Serb civilians, at least 250,000 Roma and Sinti, and approximately another 388,000 being what the Nazis described as asocials, criminals, homosexuals, German political prisoners, Jehovah's Witnesses, etc., etc. In terms of the Nazis' use of poison gas, that was primarily aimed at the Jews in the main, the mentally, physically disabled, and to a lesser extent, the Sinti and Roma. Why? Those were the only three ideologically driven Nazi killing programs. And for the Nazis, that became a problem. For the killers, for the perpetrators, because they ended up having to shoot women with babies, children, old, the sick, the mentally ill. That is why gas was primarily used against the Jews, the mentally, physically disabled, and to a lesser extent, Sinti and Roma. If we look at the number of Jewish victims by location, 5.7 to 6.3 million Jews were killed in the final solution. About 1.355 killed by the Einsatzgruppen in the Soviet Union, primarily by shooting and to a lesser extent by using the gas vans. In occupied Poland, in what became known as the death camps and killing centers, approximately 2.7 million in Auschwitz-Birkenau, in Kulmhof, in Sobibor, in Treblinka, and in Belzec. Another 260,000 approximately were killed, shot in occupied Poland, Central Europe, Serbia, Croatia. 800,000 approximately died in the ghettos of neglect, of starvation, of disease. Another approximately 500,000 were shot in the chaos at the end of the war, on the death marches. They were killed in Hungary and Romania in labor camps and other places. And finally, at least 150,000 Jews were killed in the concentration camps other than Auschwitz-Birkenau through different means: starvation, disease, neglect, lethal injection, gas, to a much smaller extent. I've put together an estimate of how many victims there were of poison gas. By my estimate, it is approximately 2.9 million. As I suggested earlier, more than 95% of those were Jews, to a lesser extent the mentally and physically disabled and some Sinti and Roma. And there were two gases, one of them carbon monoxide in two forms, but there were three gases used: Zyklon B, which is a disinfestation product primarily used in Auschwitz II Birkenau. Approximately 930,000 people were killed in chambers in II Birkenau, primarily Jews. As you see, in terms of the other concentration camps, a relatively small number, 20,000. And in fact, in some of the concentration camps, they didn't use gas at all for killing people. In terms of exhaust gas, where the primary constituent for killing is carbon monoxide, in the Action Reinhard camps, Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka, approximately 1.5 million people were killed. In the gas vans, which I talked about in my previous lecture, approximately 150 to 200,000 people were killed in Soviet Union. Another 146,000 were killed in Kulmhof, and a relatively smaller number killed in other places, Mauthausen, Belzec, etc. Pure carbon monoxide in gas canisters was used to kill approximately 100,000 people, primarily the mentally and physically disabled in the Altreich, in pre-war Germany, and to a smaller extent using a gas van in the Wartegau in East Prussia. The 14 F-13 program killed about 20,000. That came out of the adult mercy killing program. In terms of the percentages, particularly of Jews murdered by type of killing method, approximately 33% were shot, 27% were killed in Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka using exhaust gas. In Auschwitz, using Zyklon B, approximately 16% of the total. In the ghettos, from starvation, disease, neglect, approximately 14%, a much smaller number killed with the gas vans by the Einsatzgruppen in the Soviet Union in Kulmhof, and about 4% in the concentration camps. Auschwitz has become, quite rightly, the symbol of the Holocaust and Nazi war crimes in general. I showed this pie chart to somebody very interested and closely involved with Auschwitz and its memorialization, and he was highly surprised, given the narrative, that Auschwitz only accounted for approximately 16% of the Jews in the final solution. Why has Auschwitz become the symbol it is for the Holocaust? 3 reasons. Majdanek is the first concentration camp to be liberated by the Soviets in July 44, soon followed by Auschwitz in January 45. This is the first time the world gets news the Nazis have been using gas chambers and gas on a large scale to kill Jews and others. The Soviets are looking for a narrative to the end of the war. The narrative they come up with is of the cold, calculating German with his knowledge of science and engineering and the use of gas chambers and poison gas. The Soviets massively inflate the numbers killed in Majdanek and Auschwitz. The original estimates from the Soviet Union were 1.8 million killed in Majdanek, 4.1 million killed in Auschwitz. And that narrative went into the Nuremberg trials and existed thereafter. So the focus in terms of what the Holocaust was centered around primarily Auschwitz, and to a much lesser extent what happened in the Action Reinhard camps and so on and so on. The second reason Auschwitz has become the symbol for the Holocaust and Nazi war crimes, nothing survived of the Action Reinhard camps. The Nazis destroyed everything. There was nothing to find. In terms of the Einsatzgruppen and shooting and in other places, there was little evidence left. The Nazis had dug up the bodies and burned the evidence. Auschwitz and Majdanek were captured relatively intact. In terms of Auschwitz-Birkenau, although the gas chambers were blown up at the end of 1944, you could still see what was there. So actually something exists of Auschwitz to symbolize and memorialize. The third reason, Rudolf Höss, the commandant of Auschwitz, was the only senior man from the death camps to be captured, at least at the end of the war, who was to give testimony about what happened. And Höss had a tendency to blow himself up in terms of his importance and the importance of Auschwitz. He, in his affidavit to Nuremberg in 1945, gave the estimate of 3 million killed in Auschwitz, 2.5 million with gas, 500,000 with other means. Interestingly enough, by 1946, when he goes on trial in Krakow by the Poles, he's reduced that number to 1.1 million, which is actually the number that now is accepted as the number killed in Auschwitz. The Nazis' first killing program was the adult mercy killing program in the Altreich. Actually, it wasn't the first program. The first program was the children's mercy killing program, but that was relatively small. Late August 1939, just prior to the war, Hitler gives approval for the adult mercy killing program in the Altreich. Interestingly enough, the Nazis had tried to introduce or propose introducing a euthanasia law in September, October 1933. This law that they proposed was similar to laws that had been proposed in England and in America. In an excellent lecture my colleague Reinhard gave 2 weeks ago, he described how what you might call the resistance in Germany, the churches, von Papen in the government, others, managed to put a stop to that program by giving information to the international press and creating what my colleague Mr. Pullman calls a shitstorm. So that program was stopped in its tracks, and Hitler vowed not to tackle it again until war came. Hence, waiting till August 1939, Hitler gives approval. As often occurred in the Nazi hierarchy, there was a jockeying for position. Philipp Buhler, head of Hitler's personal chancellery, and Karl Brandt, who was Hitler's private doctor, was supported by Hermann Goering to run the program. The Reich Health leader, Leonardo Conti, supported by Bormann, was also proposed. In the end, they went for Buhler and Brack, Brack being the head of AMP2 in the personal chancellery. Brack was given the job to run it on a day-to-day basis. The problem was this was the Nazis' first killing program. The KDF are bookkeepers, accountants, bureaucrats. They know nothing about killing. They know nothing about organizing killing. So originally they propose that the killing methodology will be the same as in the children's mercy killing program, which is to use lethal injection in the local asylums or a limited number of local asylums. The advising doctors and psychiatrists who are to be involved reject that outright for 3 reasons. 1, they don't want their asylums to become effectively killing centers. 2, they don't want to be killing their own patients. And 3, there is some doubt over the legality of the whole program. So Brack and the others come up with an alternative plan, which is to create regional extermination camps to which the victims selected from the asylums will be sent. They then have the possibility to start using gas. Which gas? I talked about this in the previous lecture on the gas vans, is how the Nazis came to use pure carbon monoxide. They undertook some experiments in Fort 7 in Posen. They originally looked at hydrogen cyanide, possibly Zyklon B. They rejected that on the basis that if the adult mercy killing program ever became public, they wouldn't want to be seen using a product, Zyklon B, which is used for disinfestation, i.e. killing rats. So they look for an alternative. They come up with pure carbon monoxide. Why pure carbon monoxide? Carbon monoxide was the suicide method of choice in the 20s and 30s in Germany and in the rest of Europe. Pure carbon monoxide could be seen as being humane. So if the program ever becomes public, they can say, look, we use a humane method. Brack and the members of the KTF, as I said, bureaucrats, accountants. They know nothing about killing. Who do you staff the extermination camps with? The obvious solution is to use the SS, Himmler's empire. The problem is, if the adult mercy killing program in the Altreich is to become public, and does become public, you certainly don't want Himmler and the SS is seen as implementing that program, because that might suggest we're talking about murder here, not what the Nazis want to frame it as, which is euthanasia. So they come up with a solution, which is to go on a recruitment program in all the different offices of the SS to recruit men for the killing centers, the extermination camps, and to separate those men who are transferred from their association with SS. The contracts are transferred to the central program, which is named T4, Tiergarten, Straße 4, being the code name that was used for the adult mercy killing program. So, for example, we see Franz Stangl from Stapo-Linz. He is transferred to T4 and becomes the deputy in Hartheim extermination camp and then in Bernburg. Christian Wirth, he's a captain of the Kripo in Stuttgart. He is transferred to be head of the extermination camp in Hartheim. Dr. August Becker, who I've talked about at length in the lecture on the gas vans, he is a member of AMP6, SD Foreign Intelligence, but is also a chemist by background. He is transferred to T4, and he will become the roving inspector of the extermination camps. Imfried Abel, he is a doctor and member of the SS. He is recruited from the health department in Berlin to be head of the extermination camp in Brandenburg and subsequently in Bernburg. They also need for the extermination camp the lower level of men who will, for example, remove the dead bodies from the gas chambers. They will cremate the bodies, burners, etc., etc. Many of these men are recruited from the concentration camp system, for example, Sachsenhausen. In effect, Himmler runs the extermination camps for the adult mercy killing program in all but name. There are 6 extermination camps set up, 4 of which operate at any point in time. They run from beginning in January 1940 through to August 1941, when a formal end is called to the adult mercy killing program. They all use the same procedure. They all use pure carbon monoxide in gas cylinders as the killing method in gas chambers. It is worth looking at the structure of the adult mercy killing program because it is the only killing program the Nazis used, which is wholly centralized and wholly intentionalist. No other killing program was run on this basis. And it's run on this basis based on what I said. The bad experiences Nazis had had in September, October 1933. They are still afraid of German public opinion. They're afraid of the churches. They're afraid of the international press. They want to keep this program secret. And as a backup, if it becomes public, they want to create a system that has a veneer of a proper euthanasia law. In terms of the primary objective, it's to kill between 60 and 70,000 mentally and physically disabled in the Altreich. And the Nazis are focused in on killing the unproductive. They do not want to kill all mentally and physically disabled. They want to kill the unproductive, those who can't work, those who are seen as useless mouths. This is about economics mixed with ideology. It is not pure ideology, it's also economics. Secrecy is what this is all about. In terms of the structure, obviously the KDF is directly associated with Hitler. That's a problem. So the T4 organizations creates a number of shell entities to organize the whole T4 program. Again, this is about secrecy. Members of the KDF involved in the program are known by pseudonyms, so the names are not associated with the program. In terms of selecting patients from the asylums, the question is, there's a focus on productivity. Can the patient work or can they not work? Only German patients are selected. They don't want any problems with the international press if they kill other nationals. Interestingly enough, and this tells us everything about what the Nazis have in store for the Jews, all German Jews are to be selected. As part of this, you've got a 3-doctor review of each case to give the veneer of the 1933 proposed law. The patients selected to die are sent to the regional extermination camps. This is about what I said. This is about secrecy, reputation of the doctors, reputation of the asylums, efficiency, and what we call non-direct killing. So you basically separate the location of the selection of the people to die from where they are killed. In terms of the killing methodology, each of the camps operates on the very similar basis. The patients arrive, they have their valuables removed, they're undressed. The patients are killed using what might be called a humane method, pure carbon monoxide. Again, this dates back to the 1933 draft euthanasia law. Interestingly enough, the Nazis create for the first time an integrated system of killing and disposal of bodies. This is the first time, really, they use crematoria. Why? Secrecy, to get rid of the bodies. So there are no autopsies. There's no questions asked by families. There's no question of families asking the body and then finding out what has happened. This is about secrecy. And lastly, for the same reason, the T4 program itself issues death certificates. What you don't want is deaths piling up at local civil registration offices. This becomes a problem because people become aware. So this is an all-encompassing system. Pomerania, the Gau of Pomerania was pre-war German. The Gauleiter was Franz Schweder-Coburg, an old Nazi. He goes to meet Himmler in Berlin in October 1939. He proposes clearing the 4 asylums in his Gau of the mentally and physically disabled and offers the buildings to Himmler. Himmler agrees. He suggests Schweder-Coburg go to see Richard Hildebrand, who's the higher SS police Führer in Danzig, West Prussia.
They have already been killing the mentally and physically disabled in Danzig, West Prussia by shooting. There's a commando set up under Kurt Eimann, who's been doing the shooting. So Hildebrand tells Eimann that there will be patients arriving from Pomerania to Danzig, West Prussia, which will be shot. There are 10 transports of the mentally and physically disabled from Pomerania that arrive in Neustadt railway station in Danzig, West Prussia. We know 3 of those transports, amounting to 305 patients, were taken off the trains, taken to the Piasnica forest, and shot by the Eimann commando. Interestingly, the other 7 transports, because there were 10, it seems, it's not absolutely clear what happened, but it seems Brack and Bühler got wind of the fact a German GAU was not part of the centralized T4 program and put a stop to it. And it seems those other 7 transports were assigned to other asylums rather than being taken out to Piasnica forest and shot. This is interesting because this tells you, even in a highly centralized killing program like the Adam Mercy killing program, the tendency under the Nazi regime, the Gauleiter thinks he can do what he likes. It's his area. It's up to him what happens. East Prussia was again a primarily German before the Second World War. A small part was added from Poland, Zyklon. Sometime in April, May 1940, Erich Koch, the Gauleiter, meets and speaks with Heinrich Himmler. He again offers the buildings from his Gau in exchange for the mentally and physically disabled being killed. In this case, Heinrich Himmler agrees again. He gives the job to the higher SS police Führer in East Prussia, Wilhelm Redis. And in this case, Redis contacts Wilhelm Kopper, who is the higher SS police Führer in the Vartegau, another Gau. And in the Vartegau, Herbert Langer has set up a Sonderkommando, and they're using a gas fan to kill the mentally and physically disabled in the Vartegau. In this case, Redis agrees with Kopper that Langer will go to base himself in Soldau in East Prussia, and he will base himself there with a gas fan and kill the mentally and physically disabled from the asylums. They agree a fee for this, so the Vartegau will be compensated 10 Reichsmarks per killed patient, and that will be paid by presumably the Gau of East Prussia. And Langer heads there with a gas fan in May, and he kills 1,558 patients from the asylums in East Prussia. Presumably, Bühler and Brack get to hear about it again, and a stop is put to that in June. But again, it tells you, this is primarily a German Gau and should be subject to T4, yet the Gauleiter, in conjunction with Himmler, think they can do something else. If we look at Silesia, the Gau of Silesia, this was part German before the Second World War, and a large part of Poland was incorporated to create the Gau of Silesia. One of the asylums, Branica, was in the German part of Silesia, you might call it. 2 asylums were in the Polish part of Silesia, Lubliniec and Rybnik. Branica was subject to T4. In Rybnik, in 1940, they shot the Jewish patients, but otherwise it seems the hospital just continued to act as a hospital thereafter. Lubliniec, it's not totally clear what happened, but at least in 1939 and 1940, nothing happened to the patients in that asylum. In September 1939, the Nazis invade Poland. 8 Einsatzgruppen go in behind the Wehrmacht. Their job is to secure the rear areas behind the Wehrmacht. They use shooting as the killing method. After all, this is war, they would say. They don't bother with secrecy. They just bury the bodies. There's no thoughts of using gas or the secrecy as in the T4 program. Danzig, West Prussia, had been Polish before the war. It became a German Gau after the war. The Gauleiter was Albert Foster. He wanted to clear the 2 asylums in his area. He wanted the buildings for some other use. Already mentioned Richard Hildebrand, the higher SS police Führer. There was an SS unit operating out of Danzig, run by Kurt Eimann. And beginning in September 1939, the Eimann Commando take 1,692 patients from the Koch-Barova Asylum to the Szpigawski Forest and shoot them and bury the bodies. In October, they take 1,000 patients from Schwitzer Asylum to Minicek, where they shoot them and bury the bodies. This is Poland. This is not Germany. These are Poles, as far as the Nazis are concerned. There's no issue about secrecy, even burying the bodies, etc., etc. The Wartegau I've already mentioned, and I mentioned in my last lecture. The Gauleiter is Arthur Greiser. He is a fanatical Nazi, more Nazi than the Nazis, he would claim. He tried to create the model Gau, as he would claim. He also wants to target the asylums in the Wartegau, beginning in the Awinska Asylum in October 1939. The SS want this as a Kaserne. The German patients are transferred out of the asylum, and originally in the mid-October, the Langer Commando, Sonderkommando Langer, has been created for the task, start shooting the Awinska patients. As I already mentioned, the first half of October 1939, they begin experimenting in Fort 7 in Poznan as to which gas they might use for the adult mercy killing program in the Altreich. They end up using pure carbon monoxide. Obviously, Greiser and his model Gau, they want to use gas, not shooting. Langer, maybe somebody else comes up with the idea, rather than creating an extermination camp, why not use a gas van? Why not take the killing mechanism to the victims, to each of the asylums? And they are originally using pure carbon monoxide gas canisters delivered from Berlin. Tegenhof is the first asylum targeted in January, using the gas van. In January, they go to Koshan Asylum. And by March, the asylum in Koshan is completely cleared of the mentally and physically disabled. The building is then to be used as a Kaserne for a reserve infantry battalion. The picture on the bottom right shows Arthur Greiser, the Gauleiter, visiting the asylum on Hitler's birthday, 20th of April, 1940. So again, we see something else here. As well as productivity, the Nazis are targeting buildings that want for alternative uses. The last area to look at in terms of the killing of the mentally physically disabled is the government general. The government general was the residual parts of Poland occupied by the Germans. It was never incorporated into the Reich. It was a separate district. Again, these are just 3 of a number of asylums in the government general. The governor general was Hans Frank. In Helm, again, the SS wanted this building for a Kaserne. So in January 1940, they shoot the 441 patients. Again, interestingly, in Drewnica and Twórki near Warsaw, it seems there were no killing actions direct. Patients died from starvation, disease, but they were not subject to a central program. So, what does the killing of the mentally, physically disabled tell us about the Nazis and the subsequent killing programs? As I said, the adult mercy killing program in the Altreich was the only centralized program the Nazis ever ran for killing. Why was that? Secrecy goes back to being afraid of German public opinion, the church's international press. But what we saw, even then, the tendency in the Nazi regime is to functionalism. The local authority, the local regime, has their own ideas about what to do, even if there's a centralized program. Never mind in occupied Poland, where it was purely left to the local administrations, the Gauleiter in conjunction, obviously, with the SS, as to what was to be done with the mentally and physically disabled and the asylums. What we also see is Jews being targeted already. This tells you already what the Nazis have in mind when the time comes. Jews are a special case. There's also a focus here on productivity. The aim is not to kill all the mentally and physically disabled, it's to kill the unproductive mentally and physically disabled. In March 1941, preparations are continuing for Operation Barbarossa, the Nazi invasion of the Soviet Union. On the 14th of March 1941, Heinrich Himmler meets with Victor Brack, who is effectively running the T4 program. Himmler, presumably because he expects a lot more patients, a lot more prisoners to come to the concentration camps, wants to clear the concentration camps of the ill, the sick, what might be called the unproductive. So he agrees with Brack that there will be selections in the concentration camps, and those selected prisoners will be sent to 3 of the extermination camps used for T4, Sonnenstein, Hartheim, and Bernburg. The concentration camps are part of the Nazi legal system. They come out of the Enabling Act of 1933. There had been problems in the 30s with lawyers and investigators asking questions about deaths in the concentration camps. So the Nazis, in terms of the concentration camps, because primarily the prisoners are Germans, Poles obviously as well, but others, but primarily Germans. The Nazis are always afraid of German public opinion and the international press. So this program, which became known as 14F13, is subject to all the controls that were built for the adult mercy killing program in the Altreich. So there is a 3-doctor review. 3 doctors go to the camps to review the list. It's just a rubber stamp in effect in many cases. Those selected are sent on trains to Sonnenstein, Hartheim, and Bernburg, where they are killed in that process. At the same time as this program gets up and running, some of the camps are looking at their own methods for killing, rather than sending their ill and sick prisoners to the T4 program. They look at lethal injection. So, for example, in August 1941, in Auschwitz, they were experimenting with different types of lethal injection: EpiPen, ether, benzene, peridrol, phenol, as to what's the best method to use to kill the ill and the sick, and they end up using phenol injections direct to the heart. Other concentration camps are also experimenting with different forms of lethal injection. And what is interesting in terms of Auschwitz, Auschwitz has one transport from Auschwitz to Sonnenstein in late July 1941 of 575 prisoners. And that is the only transport they ever sent. Because at the same time as experimenting with lethal injection, they start experimenting with gas, which we'll talk about later. Similarly in Mauthausen, they also experiment with gas, a gas fan, also with Zyklon B. In addition, Jews are targeted again. So we saw it in the mercy killing program in the Altreich. We see it in the 14F13 program for dealing with unproductive prisoners in the concentration camps. It tells you everything about what the Nazis have in mind in terms of the Jews. Again, in terms of preparations for the invasion of the Soviet Union and possibly post-war killing programs, I talked about this at length in my lecture on the gas vans. But Arthur Neber, head of the Reich Criminal Police-Amt and Einsatzgruppe B, goes to see Heydrich with the head of the Criminal Technische Institute, part of the RKPA, Dr. Hies, and suggests gas vans for killing the mentally and physically disabled of the Soviet Union when the time comes. So Neber and Hies go to see Heydrich. They suggest using gas vans, but using exhaust gas, not pure carbon monoxide, for killing the mentally and physically disabled of the Soviet Union. Again, this is about the psychological effects on the killers of individual killing, presumably shooting. As Neber is heard to say to another member of the KTI, Dr. Albert Widmann, you can't expect soldiers to shoot idiots. What is also interesting about this, it doesn't seem there were special preparations for what one might call the final solution of the Jewish question. It seems at this time the plans are as happened in Poland, centralization of the Jews in ghettos. But other than that, nothing. That might suggest the Nazis had no plans at this time for what they were going to do with the Jews during or after the invasion of the Soviet Union. June the 22nd, 1941, Operation Barbarossa, the Nazis invade the Soviet Union. As in Poland, 4 Einsatzgruppen go in behind the Wehrmacht to clear the rear areas. Their job is to kill resistors, those who are likely to resist, members of the Communist Party, etc., etc., etc. Obviously, as in Poland, they're using shooting. This is, again, the Nazis would say, part of war. We see an acceleration in who they're killing. So by July 41, they're starting to shoot all Jews of military age. By end of July into August, they're starting to kill Jews generally. And in October, the order is given to the Einsatzgruppe by Heydrich that all Jews will be targeted. There is a huge discussion, and still goes on, about whether the final solution in the Soviet Union, because we're only talking Soviet Union at this point in time, we're not talking about any other area of the Reich, only the Soviet Union, whether there was a central order given to kill Jews and what the plan was. The Holy Grail has been looking for an order from Hitler or Himmler to say, this is the final solution, undertake it. Based on my work, I would doubt that was actually issued or even needed, because if you look back to what I described in the killing of the mentally physically disabled in occupied Poland, there were no orders given to the Gauleiters to what to do in their Gau. It was just assumed, it was an ideology, it was just assumed you would do it. You didn't need to be given an order to do it. So actually, I think the closest we're ever going to get to an order is Hermann Göring's order to Heydrich to prepare a final solution of the Jewish question. And he gave that order in his role as plenipotentiary general for the 4-year plan, which also tells me something else. This is about economics. This is about killing the unproductive, putting the productive to work. Himmler visited Minsk on the 15th to the 16th of August 1941. I talked about this in the lecture on the gas funds, but again, he's got an agenda set for him. What is he doing? He's visiting an asylum, the Novinky asylum in this case. He visits a Soviet POW camp near Minsk. He goes to visit the Minsk Ghetto. These are the 3 groups of people to be targeted, one would presume, if not after the end of the war, possibly during the war. Himmler also attends and witnesses a shooting by Einsatzkommando 8, headed by Dr. Otto Bradfisch in Minsk, of Jews and other prisoners. I think, personally, what happened there is underestimated in terms of subsequent Nazi policies with regard to how to kill, i.e. with poison gas. This is a testimony by Andreas von Amberger, who was translator and quartermaster for Arthur Neber, who was head of Einsatzgruppe B, as well as concurrently being the head of the Reich Criminal Police Amt. And what he says is very interesting. He gave this testimony pretty soon after the end of the war, December 45. He says, and we have this also confirmed from other testimonies, shooting so many people on a one-to-one basis started to cause psychological problems for the killers. So he gives some examples here about a man got up at night and started digging holes, another got screaming fits, another hacked up furniture, poured gasoline over it and tried to start a fire, etc., etc., etc. This was discussed by various members of the Einsatzgruppe, it seems, with Himmler. Himmler, who'd seen and witnessed the shooting in Minsk, is said to have concluded that the emotional strain on the men was very great. And there's always the story about Himmler being soft himself. But the most important thing, what Amberger testifies, probably as a result of the Reichsführer order, Neber now began to investigate the problem of the mass extermination of people without the mental burden for the members of the commandos. This, for me, is the point where the Nazis start to think about other killing methods other than shooting, i.e. they're going to turn to gas, especially with regards to killing women with babies, the old, the sick, the mentally and physically disabled. Interesting enough, Amberger also says there was general problems with shooting. It was too public, it's too noisy. The populations in the local area get to hear about it, get to know about it, it's too public. I described this in detail in the lecture on the gas fans. Himmler has given the order to Neber to look for alternative methods. Neber orders Albert Widmann from the Criminal Technische Institute in Berlin to Minsk, and they undertake 3 tests. The first test was with explosives. That failed. The other 2 tests took place in Novinky and in Mogilev, and they are looking at a method using exhaust gas. And they are looking for a specific method, I think, here for the Soviet Union, which is to use any truck and connect it up with a schlauch to a gas-proof room and have that act as a gas chamber. It seems Neber wrote a report for Himmler on the potential of these methods for killing as alternatives to shooting, but these methods were never used again, possibly because the gas fans were to become available in the next few months, and they would be designated as the alternative method for use in the Soviet Union. As part of the ongoing Einsatzgruppe operations, in 17th July 41, Heydrich issues an order to the Einsatzgruppe that the Soviet POW camps are to be scoured for those who could potentially cause problems in terms of opposition for the Nazis, so functionaries of the Comintern, political commissars of the Red Army. They are to be singled out and they are to be killed. So, again, obviously they're worried about the reaction of the other prisoners in the camps, the local population, etc. So Heydrich takes an interesting decision on this. He decides that the selected POWs will be sent to the concentration camps, which are primarily in the Altreich. And 30,000 Soviet POWs are selected under this program and sent to the concentration camps in the Altreich. Sachsenhausen, Dachau, Buchenwald get the bulk. What do? They shoot them in the camps on Altreich territory. They don't register the Soviet POWs, they just shoot them. Auschwitz, which I mentioned earlier, thinks about doing something different. It starts off beating a few to death, shooting a few. They then, at the end of August, start to look at using poison gas, Zyklon B. And they use it first on Soviet POWs. What is interesting about this order from Heydrich, this is the only time I know of that the concentration camps in the Altreich, Auschwitz is not in the Altreich, it was part of Polish Silesia, is used as a mass killing center. They effectively become killing centers. This is the only time. Whether this was a mistake and they didn't do it again, I don't know the answer to that question. Again, under this program, all the Jews are targeted. This tells you again what the Nazis have in mind for the Jews. In terms of the final solution in the Soviet Union, for me, this is one of the most important surviving documents which tells us how the final solution was to be organized, particularly in the Soviet Union. This is a letter drafted by Dr. Erhard Wetzel of the Reich Ministry for Occupied Territories in response to a letter from Hinrich Lohse, who was the Reich Commissioner for Ostland, Latvia, Lithuania, parts of Belarus. We don't have his original letter, but presumably, when one reads this, Lohse was asking the question that he would like to kill the unproductive Jews, and he would like to use gas to do it. So, in reply to that, Wetzel has a discussion with Adolf Eichmann, head of Amt for B4, Jewish Affairs in the Gestapo, and it's interesting what he says. Eichmann says camps for Jews are to be set up in Riga and Minsk, to which Jews from the Altreich may also be sent. Interestingly, and the word no objections is very important, in reply to whether Lohse can use gas, Eichmann says no objections. Basically, it's up to you which method you use. Highly functional, it's left to the local administration to decide which method they're going to use. But the comes back to what I was saying on the intentionalist, functionalist nature of the final solution in the Soviet Union. It is well understood. What we're talking about is killing the unproductive, putting the productive to work. Riga Ghetto was set up soon after the occupation of Riga in August 41. In August 41, there are approximately 35 Jews in the ghetto. Riga receives 24 transports of Jews from the Altreich, from Austria, from Terezin, between November 41 and October 42. There are selections of those arriving transport in Skiratava railway station. The difference here is, even though Riga has been assigned one gas van in December 41, they don't use gas for mass killing of Jews, they use shooting. So, in Drylini, in Bikaniki, and Rumbala Forest, they undertake mass shooting of Jews. In November and December 41, they shoot upwards of 20,000 Jews in the forest, the unproductive. They also set about creating work camps and other camps in and around Riga. So we have the Salaspils prison camp. And eventually in March 43, they build a concentration camp in Riga, Kaiserwald, which has, I believe, 16 subcamps. So actually, Riga is a combination of an extermination center and a big labor camp where the productive are put to work. What I would call a killing center. The difference is, unlike the extermination centers that use gas, here they use shooting, primarily. They've got a gas van, but they don't really use it for mass killing. Similarly, in Minsk, The ghetto in Minsk is created end of June, beginning of July 41. There are approximately 80,000 Jews in the ghetto. Again, Minsk receives 25 transports of Jews from the Altreich, from Austria, from Terezin between November 41 and October 42. Again, Minsk has been assigned 2 to 3 gas fans. Other than a limited number of cases, it doesn't use it for mass killing of Jews. They use primarily shooting for killing Jews. But they are doing the same thing here. There is a whole number of labor camps in and around Minsk. The productive are put to work. The unproductive are shot in the Blagowshchina forest, in the Sheshkova forest. This is a similar model to Riga, which acts as an extermination camp, but also as a giant labor camp. In terms of the gas fans, again, I talked about it at length in my previous lecture, but basically, there were no fixed gas chambers in the Soviet Union. None. Presumably because the decision was made sometime after August 41 that the gas fans would be utilized more generally for the final solution rather than just being used to kill the mentally and physically disabled of the Soviet Union. So the gas fans were supposed to be the solution for the Soviet Union in terms of using gas to alleviate the psychological effects on the men of individual shooting. It didn't turn out that way. The gas fans were not suitable for use in the Soviet Union for the reasons I outlined in my previous lecture. We have the testimony of Friedrich Predel, who head of AMP2D3A, which built the gas vans and was responsible for the drivers. So in a testimony in 1967, he said, Walter Rauf, who was head of AMP2D, ultimately responsible for the gas vans, once snapped at me with what shit we'd built. These things didn't work. Predel replied that I had pointed out to him beforehand the vehicles were unsuitable for Russia. That is why, if you look at the proportion of victims, particularly Jewish, killed by the Einsatzgruppen or the commander, the Sicherheitspolizei in this occupied Soviet Union, actually very few are killed with gas. Most are shot. The Wartegau encompassed an area of pre-war Poland that subsequently became a Gau of the Reich. The Gauleiter, I already mentioned, was Greiser. On the 16th of July, 1941, Rolf Heinz Herbner, who is head of the SD in Poznan, sends a letter to Adolf Eichmann, head of AMP4B4 Jewish Affairs, and he states on behalf of, presumably, the administration of the Wartegau, we have this vast ghetto of Jews in Littmanstadt, Lodz. What are we going to do with them? What are we going to do with the unproductive Jews? The productive are fine, we put them to work. What are we going to do for the unproductive? They will starve to death, possibly over the winter. They may cause disease, given that there's a large German part of Lodz Littmanstadt. What is to be done? And they come to the conclusion the humane thing to do is to kill the unproductive Jews using a quick-acting agent. So this tells us again what the Nazis have already got in mind, and there doesn't need to be a central order. Kill the unproductive, put the productive to work. Whether there was a reply to that letter, we don't know, but in any case, beginning of September 1941, Hitler so far has refused to allow the German Jews to be deported east. He changes his mind. He thinks the war against the Soviet Union is won. And presumably without consulting Greiser, he orders Heinrich Himmler to deport 60,000 Jews from the Altreich to Littmanstadt, to Lodz, to the very ghetto the administrators have been complaining to Eichmann is a problem. This then becomes a serious problem for Greiser because his administrators are not happy at all. Greiser goes to Hitler, obviously to try and get a solution. What do they come up with? Hitler agrees the number of Jews to be deported to Lodz Littmanstadt will be reduced to 20,000. And in exchange, Greiser will be given the authority to kill 100,000 Jews of the Varteland, presumably the unproductive. This is the beginning of the final solution outside of the Soviet Union. And this is a regional solution to a regional problem. This is not a centralized control process. Greiser gives the job, obviously, to Kopper, who is the higher SS police Führer. Herbert Langer and his Sonderkommando, who have been implementing the mercy killing program in the Warthegau, is given the job. I discussed this at length in the lecture on gas vans, but he uses tried and trusted methods he knows, which is the gas van, except this time he uses them on a stationary basis in Chelmno. What is also interesting, Langer creates what I call a just-in-time method of killing. He gets a set number of Jews deported to Komov that he has to kill in that day because there's nowhere else for them to stay. So he develops a just-in-time method. Paradoxically, under this method, the ill, the sick, the weak, those who can't walk, slow up the process. So therefore, they are taken out and shot. So paradoxically, it's the other way around from what the system was designed for. But again, this is a regional solution to using regional methods. This is not centrally driven from Berlin. It's Greiser asking for this, and it's Greiser driving it. And Greiser is heavily involved with the final solution in the Warthegau right till the end, until Littmanstadt is closed in August 44. In terms of the final solution in the general government, as we talked about, Hans Frank is the Governor General. Interestingly enough, while Greiser was heavily involved in the final solution in the Warthegau, Hans Frank is less involved in the final solution in the Government General. Interesting. It is Globocnik and Himmler who come up with a plan for the final solution in the Government General, which they present to Hitler in early October 1941. That plan is approved. Himmler suggests sending some of the members of the T4 organization, like Christian Wirth, who have gained knowledge of mass killing in the extermination camps. They go to Lublin, and they are the men who will build and operate the camps. Belzec is the first extermination camp to become operational in the Government General in March 42. Unlike Herbert Langer, he couldn't use the same methodology he'd used for killing the mentally and physically disabled. He had to come up with an amended version. Pure carbon monoxide and gas canisters could not be used to kill hundreds of thousands or millions of people. You couldn't transport enough canisters to do the job. It's too expensive, et cetera, so he has to come up with a new method. He doesn't want to use Zyklon B, interestingly enough. He decides on using engines from automobiles, from tanks, et cetera, effectively to produce exhaust gas in stationary gas chambers. This is his method that he develops, particularly for the final solution in the Government General. Interestingly enough, in terms of the method, we talked about the problems with the gas fans in the Soviet Union. What's the problem with using engines? Obviously, they're subject to breakdown. Unreliable. We have this testimony from Kurt Gerstein, head of the health technology department in the SS Hygiene Institute, who visited Belzec in August 42 with Dr. Pfannenstiel, quite a famous testimony. And this tells us something very interesting. On this visit, the engine breaks down, and the victims are stuck in the gas chamber for more than 2 hours. Christian Wirth, who is obviously the commandant of Belzec, it's his camp, he's built it, he's designed it, he's come up with a killing method. This is a serious problem for him, because the method is obviously seen as not efficient. This doesn't look good for him. He begs Kurt Gerstein not to report this back to Berlin, if Gerstein is to be believed. And according to Gerstein, he brings Zyklon B with him from Berlin, because they want to encourage Wirth to use Zyklon B. But anyway, Wirth manages to persuade him not to do that. It's his method. He wants to use it. It's the method of choice. 2 further extermination camps are set up in the Government General, beginning in May in Sobibor, and then Treblinka 2 in July. Again, they are staffed by men from the Action T4 program. So we've got Imfred Abel, who becomes the first commandant of Treblinka, Franz Stangl, who becomes the first commandant of Sobibor. It seems, and I will talk about this later, the capacities of the gas chambers originally built in Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka are nothing like enough to kill the number of Jews the Nazis have in mind. So, for example, in Treblinka, which opens in July and August, there's absolute chaos because the transports of prisoners, of Jews to the camp are far too many for the capacity of the gas chamber, and absolute chaos reigns. Abel gets sacked from the job, and Paul Stangl takes over as commandant of Treblinka. Whether that's connected to Himmler's order of July 19th, 1942, in which he says he wants the final solution completed in the Government General by the end of the year. What is he talking about here? He's not talking about killing all Jews. He's talking about killing all the unproductive Jews, and the productive Jews residing in a limited number of work camps and places. Again, whether this is linked to the fact beginning in July in Belzec and then into the autumn in Sobibor and Treblinka, the gas chambers have to be rebuilt because they are far too small for the job the Nazis have in mind. Again, I'm going to talk about this, but in Treblinka, for example, the capacity when the camp originally comes into operation in July is little more than 1,000. The rebuilt gas chambers, which start operating in the autumn of 42, that capacity is increased to 6,000 a day. So something completely changes here. This is just a pictorial that shows the Government General and associated areas. We can see here Treblinka primarily exists to kill the Jews of Warsaw, the biggest ghetto, 500,000 Jews and surrounding areas. Belzec primarily exists to kill the Jews of Galicia and surrounding areas. Sobibor is a much smaller effort around Helm. This is primarily a regional solution using regional methods. In 42 and 43 there are some transports from Western, Central, and Southern Europe of Jews to these camps to be killed, but this is on the scale of the number killed in the Action Reinhard camps is relatively small. This is, again, a regional solution to a regional problem using regional methods. They've got their own killing method. It's not the same as Cook. On the 14th of October 1943, there is the rebellion in Sobibor by the remaining Jewish workers. It seems Himmler takes fright. He orders that all the labor camps and existing camps in the Government General are to be closed and the surviving Jews killed. Interestingly enough, They are not put on trains to the existing or remaining extermination camps, primarily Auschwitz. The Nazis decide to shoot them. And in 2 days, on the 3rd and 4th of October 1943, they shoot 42,000 Jews from the Travniki labor camp, from the Poniatowel labor camp, from Majdanek and surrounding labor camps. This is interesting because it tells you, when it comes down to it, if the Nazis have a short-term problem that needs to be resolved short-term, they resort to shooting, not to gas. Gas is too slow. No extermination camp had a capacity to kill 42,000 in 2 days. 7,000 possibly, not 42,000. So, what we've been looking at so far in terms of the Soviet Union, in terms of the Varteland, in terms of the government general, is regional solutions, a regional final solution, if you want to call that, based on general ideas coming out of Berlin. The methods are regional, the solution is regional. The problem comes with what to do with the Western, Southern, and Central European Jews. You cannot kill and create extermination camps in France, in Holland, in Greece, etc., for a number of reasons, local public opinion, still the international press, etc. So what is to be done in terms of the final solution with the Western, Southern, and Central European Jews? Auschwitz was planned as a concentration camp for Polish political prisoners. Construction began in May, June 1940. In January 1941, IG Farben decided to build a huge synthetic oil plant in Monowitz, close to Auschwitz. The idea being to use the prisoners from Auschwitz concentration camp as cheap slave labor. In March 41, Himmler visits Auschwitz for the first time and meets Rudolf Höss, the commandant, and instructs him to triple the capacity of the camp to 30,000 prisoners in order to act as workers in the IG Farben plant in Monowitz. How did Auschwitz come to become that symbol, that the extermination camp we know? According to Rudolf Höss, in his memoirs from 1946, he was ordered in the summer of 41 suddenly to go and see the Reichsführer SS Himmler. And Himmler told Höss that the Führer had ordered the final solution of the Jewish question, the SS to implement it. And because the extermination centers in the East are not in a position to carry out the large actions, Auschwitz will become that center of killing. How did Auschwitz come to use Zyklon B? I talked about this in the lecture on the gas vans. I believe completely by chance. In summer of 41, Auschwitz has a typhus spotted fever epidemic. The barracks in Auschwitz, one, have to be disinfested with Zyklon B. Tesch and Stabenow, who are the distributor of Zyklon B east of the Elbe, who also undertake disinfestation in the concentration camps and also provide disinfestation equipment for the concentration camps. Men from Tesch and Stabenow are in Auschwitz in the summer of 41, disinfesting the barracks using Zyklon B. Now, there are some indications from the trial of Dr. Tesch, British trial immediately after the war, that there were some discussions between some members of the Auschwitz Guard and the men from Tesch and Stabenow, and presumably, this is not clear, presumably the question was asked whether Zyklon B, which was used to disinfest the barracks, could then be used to kill people. So, end of August 1941, Karl Fritsch, who is Höss's deputy, decides, presumably on his own account, because Höss was away, to undertake an experiment to kill prisoners with Zyklon B. So this experiment takes place in the cellar of Block 11 in Auschwitz I, the main camp. And this experiment is on Soviet POWs. Some of those Soviet POWs have been sent to Auschwitz to be killed. And the experiment is not wholly successful. The cellar of Block 11 was probably not the ideal place for a gas chamber. It was a multitude of little rooms and nooks and crannies and hadn't been properly gas-proofed. So it takes 3 days for the prisoners to die, which is not probably what was intended. Anyway, presumably when Höss gets back from his trip, the experiment was discussed with Höss, and they decide to undertake another experiment on the 3rd of September 1941 in the cellar of Block 11. The victims are a combination of Soviet POWs and Auschwitz's own sick and ill. I mentioned before, Auschwitz only had one transport to Sonnenstein of 14 F-13 prisoners end of July. They never made another one. So presumably what they've got in mind is having their own gas chamber to kill their own ill and sick and any others that happen to be in Auschwitz. Obviously, having a gas chamber in the center of a concentration camp is not ideal. Far too public. There are a lot of German prisoners, also Poles prisoners in the camp. This is not the ideal place. So they decide, in the first instance, to move the gas chamber out of Block 11 and create a gas chamber in the crematorium building, which is just outside the camp, became known as Crematorium 1. It seems there were no further gassings between the 3rd of September 41 and February 42. In February 42, there was a transport of Jewish prisoners from Beuthen in Upper Silesia. Those are presumably ill and sick prisoners. And this is the first time there is a transport to Auschwitz of prisoners who are killed using gas. They are killed in Crematorium 1, all of the prisoners. As I said, presumably they were sick and ill. And again, it's too public. It's too close to the camp. So Höss, the commandant, decides to build a gas chamber in Birkenau. Birkenau is being built as a huge Kriegsgefangenenlager. It's 4 or 5 kilometers from Auschwitz. It will accommodate 100,000 prisoners, etc., etc. There's an old farmhouse outside the planned camp. Höss converts that to a gas chamber. It's known as Bunker 1, or the Red House, and this begins operating as a gas chamber from March 42. So we see a number of transports to Auschwitz, beginning with the one from Beuthen in February through June, of transports from Upper Silesia of presumably ill and sick prisoners from Upper Silesia. And they are gassed, first of all in Crematorium 1 and then subsequently in Bunker 1. So Auschwitz is starting to act as a regional killing center. Upper Silesia is where Auschwitz is based. This is regional. Okay. The first transport of Jews from Central, Western, and Southern Europe is a transport of Jews from Slovakia in March 42. There are no selections from this transport. All of the prisoners go into the camp. In fact, there are no selections from any transports from Western, Southern, and Central European Europe until July 42. Between February I should say, and June, there are a number of transports from Upper Silesia, the local area, and they are killed in the gas chambers. It is seen that the capacity of Bunker 1, which is about 800 for gassing, is not sufficient. So the Höss decides to build a second gas chamber nearby the first gas chamber, Bunker 1. Again, he converts a farmhouse into a gas chamber. It's called Bunker 2, the White House. So he doubles the capacity effectively to about 1,600. 4th of July, 1942. There's a transport from Slovakia to the camp, and this is the first time there is a selection from the transport. The unproductive are sent to the gas chambers, the productive go into the camp. So one can say on the 4th of July, 42, Auschwitz began to act more like what we think of it as today, as a killing center for the Western, Southern, and Central European Jews. On the 17th and 18th of July 1942, Himmler visits Auschwitz. He is there to discuss a number of things. First of all, he wants to see the progress on the IG Farben plant. He wants to talk about, with Höss, the expansion of the camp. He wants to talk about the Kriegsgefangenenlager in Birkenau and various other things. Himmler also witnesses a selection from a transport and a gassing. On the 17th of July, 1942, there was a transport of Dutch Jews from Westerbork and Amersfoort who arrive in the camp. There is a selection. The unproductive are killed in Bunker 2, and Himmler witnesses the whole process. Himmler also promotes Höss on this visit to Auschwitz. This is what we think of as Auschwitz, the 4 huge crematorium gas chamber buildings in Birkenau. Auschwitz II Birkenau as it became known. This is what we think of as Auschwitz. These were originally intended as huge mortuary crematorium buildings for the camp in Birkenau, the Kriegsgefangenenlager, which the capacity was now supposed to be 130,000. They were not intended as gas chambers. It seems, from the work done, that sometime in the autumn of 42, the plans for the building of these structures in Birkenau were changed. And they were no longer to be mortuary cremas, they were to be gas chamber crematoriums. So in autumn 42, this is the first time this is planned. By 1944, Auschwitz, as a killing center, is the last one standing. Reinhard camps have been closed. Kulmhof had been reopened for a brief time in June 44 to kill the Jews of Littmanstadt. It was too slow. It was quickly shut down. Auschwitz is the last camp standing. Why? With the addition of the 4 huge gas chambers and crematoriums, Auschwitz now has a capacity to kill more than 7,000 people per day. So we see in the summer and autumn of 44, we see the 420,000 Hungarian Jews are transferred to Auschwitz, many of them gassed, some sent into the camp. The Lodz Ghetto, which is closed in August 44, 70,000 thereabout Jews are transferred to Auschwitz, and many again are gassed. We see other transports from Slovakia, and I think the last one was from Terezin. And in the period from 15th of May to 9th of July 44, when they received the 420,000 Jews, the Nazis are killing in Auschwitz every day more than 7,000 Jews. This is the highest killing rate in terms of use of gas from the whole Nazi period. The problem is, the gas chambers have a capacity of 7,100, but the cremation capacity of the 4 buildings is only 4,167 in a 24-hour period. So you can gas 7,000 people per day, but you can only cremate the bodies half that number. And that assumes the crematorium are working and can work to full efficiency and can work for 24 hours. So as we can see from the very famous photograph clandestinely taken by a prisoner of the killing of the Hungarian Jews in between May and July, the Nazis had to resort to burning the bodies in open-air pits because the crematorias couldn't cope. I apologize for all the numbers, it's a lot, but I will explain. This table shows, or is an estimate of, I still work on it, but it shows the killing capacities of the different extermination camps, killing centers. Kulmhof was used as gas vans and the Reich Security main office gas vans. And these are daily capacities, and I've calculated these as follows. I have taken the estimated area of the gas chamber or gas chambers in a particular camp. I've multiplied that by 9.1 stroke 9.2, which is the accepted maximum number of people you can fit in a square meter. And that gives you the capacity, maximum capacity of how many people you can gas in a gas chamber or gas chambers. So, and I put this up because this reveals a lot, actually, in terms of what I've been talking about. If we look at Auschwitz II, Birkenau, as it became known, originally, obviously, the gassing was done in Auschwitz I and Crematorium I. It seems Auschwitz only ever undertook one gassing per day. Whether that was because of the slow system, et cetera, I still investigate. It may be they undertook more than one gassing when they killed the Hungarian Jews in the summer of 44, but it does seem Auschwitz did one gassing per day if they had a transport. So we can see here, the capacity of Auschwitz in December 41 is 700 per day on that basis. Bunker 1 comes into operation in March 42. They have a capacity of 820. In June 42, Bunker 2 comes in. They have a capacity of 1,640. And they have a capacity of 1,640 until March to June 1943, when the 4 huge gas chamber crematory structures come on board in Birkenau. So, coming back to Rudolf Höss and his claim that Himmler ordered him to come and see him in the summer of 41, and the extermination camps, the other extermination camps weren't doing the job, and Auschwitz was to be the central place of killing. This is obviously not true, in terms of the timing at least. More likely, it is not till the summer of 42, autumn of 42, maybe on Himmler's visit in July 42, there is any discussion about increasing the capacity of killing in Auschwitz and Auschwitz becoming this killing center we know today. But it certainly wasn't in the summer of 41. More likely summer of 42, possibly even later. And again, Auschwitz is a regional killing center. It becomes the regional killing center for Western, Southern, and Central European Jews. It is a solution, local solution for that area. It comes back to, again, what are you going to do with the Western, Southern, Central European Jews? You can't set up extermination camps in Greece and France, et cetera, et cetera. If we have a look at Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka, I talked a bit about this. The capacity of Belzec, and this assumes 2 gassings per day, because based on the research, these camps were doing 2, maybe more gassings per day. So in terms of the capacity of Belzec, assuming 2 gassings per day, when it opened in March, it had assuming 2 gassings per day, a capacity of 1,700. And it had this capacity until the gas chambers were rebuilt in July, when the capacity doubled to 3,500. Sobibor was relatively smaller. It only had a capacity of 900 in May. The gas chambers were rebuilt in Sobibor in September, and the capacity was doubled to 1,750. Now, the really interesting one is Treblinka 2. Treblinka 2, which started operations in July 42, assuming 2 gassings per day, only had a capacity to kill 900 Jews. In terms of what is planned in the government general, especially in relation to the Warsaw Ghetto. This is nowhere near enough. So they have to rebuild the gas chambers in the autumn of 42, and the capacity is increased sixfold. It now has a capacity to kill nearly 6,000 per day. And we know from the available information on Treblinka, they were getting transports of 5,000, 6,000 a day. So it begs the question for me, is the rebuilding of the gas chambers in the Action Reinhard camps, is that to do with Himmler's order of July 42 that he wants the final solution completed in the government general? Or has Christian Wirth and his men completely got the maths wrong? Well, you don't have to be a mathematician to work out how many people you can kill in a space. It's relatively easy. So I don't think they got it wrong, and I can only assume there was a change in policy. And they wanted the killing process done much quicker. Therefore, that's why they massively increased the capacity of the gas chambers. But as you can see, right up until March 43, Treblinka is the one with by far the biggest killing capacity, much more than Auschwitz. Auschwitz at this point is not the central killing center that we all assume for Europe. The numbers don't lie. In terms of the men who undertook killing with poison gas, Herbert Langer, as we know, had come out of the adult mercy killing program. He then was responsible for killing the Jews, or the unproductive Jews of the Varteland, Vartegau. He used his tried and tested method. Maybe he invented the gas van. He wants to use gas vans. They're not the most efficient, but that's what he wants to use. Christian Wirth, he comes out of the adult mercy killing program in the Altreich. He has been using stationary gas chambers, and he's been using pure carbon monoxide. As I discussed, you couldn't use pure carbon monoxide and gas canisters for what they had in mind in the government general. This is killing on a much larger scale, so he has to look for another methods. He ends up using engines and stationary gas chambers. Dr. August Becker, he had been the roving killing inspector for the extermination camps in the mercy killing program in the Altreich. He is then given the job, assigned by Himmler, actually, to be the roving killing inspector for the gas vans in the Soviet Union used by the Einsatzgruppen. The only person who was not involved in the adult mercy killing program was Rudolf Höss. He comes up with his own method, Zyklon B. So, what is also interesting, between Wirth and Globocnik, his boss, and Höss, there is a competition in killing methods. So we know, from Höss at least, Globocnik visited Auschwitz in 1943 to see how it was done in Auschwitz. And Globocnik was bragging about how much better his method was in the Action Reinhard camps. It was quicker, more efficient, etc., etc. We see from Höss's testimony with regard to his pomposity in suggesting Himmler called him in the summer of 41 and said Auschwitz will be the killing center for the final solution. Certainly not in timing, that was correct. That Höss, and you can read this in his testimonies and his affidavits at Nuremberg and in Krakow, he is bigging himself up. Somehow he's proud of his work. He's bigging himself up in terms of what he's done. We saw in terms of Kurt Gerstein's testimony on his visit to Belzec in August 42. Wirth's method is under the microscope and it's not working very well. And this is a reflection on him and his boss. So we see, and this is a part of the whole thing about the nature of the Nazis. Highly functional. These guys create their own methods, and then there's a competition as to which is the best method. There's no central direction on this from Berlin. It's local, it's regional, it's functional. In terms of the concentration camps and the use of poison gas, I put up the numbers right at the beginning. The number of prisoners killed in the concentration camps, other than Auschwitz-Birkenau, which is a special case, is relatively small, maybe 20,000. From 1941, the concentration camps have problems with typhus and spotted fever and other communicable diseases. There's a big push to start using disinfestation products like Zyklon B, as they did in Auschwitz, to disinfect the barracks, also for clothes, and also the prisoners. So all the camps start to use Zyklon B and other hydrogen cyanide derivative products, but they use it on a piecemeal basis. In Neuengamme in 1942, there's 2 gassings using Zyklon B of Soviet POWs in the penal block, and thereafter nothing. In Stutthof, they kill approximately 1,000 prisoners, including some Soviet POWs in 1943, using Zyklon B. In Sachsenhausen, as part of creating an all-encompassing crematoria, mortuary, and gas chamber, they built a gas chamber. It's not known how many prisoners were gassed there, but probably not more than 500 or 1,000. In Ravensbrück, in February 1945, they have many ill and sick prisoners, those coming back from the east, for example. They decide to build a small gas chamber in an old wooden shed near the crematorium building. And it seems from February 1945, they gas 5,000 ill and sick prisoners. In many of the camps, they don't use gas at all for killing. So they don't use gas at all for killing in Buchenwald. In Dachau, they build a gas chamber as part of the new integrated mortuary cremation block, but it seems it's never used. They don't use gas in Gross-Rosen. They don't use gas in Flossenburg. They don't use gas in any of the concentration camps in the Soviet Union, so for example, Kaiserwald. Majdanek is a special case. So Majdanek was originally, like Birkenau, to be a Kriegsgefangenenlager. And it's proposed as that in the autumn of 1941. In March 1942, it comes under the control of the Inspectorate of Concentration Camps, but it's not till February 1943 that it becomes an official concentration camp. Majdanek lies within Lublin, which is in the area of Globocnik and the Action Reinhard operation. So, Majdanek is directly involved. For example, some of the labor camps in Lublin and the surrounding districts are directly involved with Action Reinhard in terms of sorting clothes of the Jewish victims of Action Reinhard, etc., etc., etc. It seems in the autumn of 1942, Majdanek looked at using poison gas for killing prisoners. Interestingly enough, they look at using pure carbon monoxide. Why would that be? That can only be the influence of Wirth and the men from the Action T4 program. They don't use that for very long. In 1943, they start using Zyklon B. Now, there is no exact estimate I've seen for the number of prisoners gassed in Majdanek. It seems there were a few transports from Warsaw, from Białystok, and from some other areas that were gassed. But it is not known to what extent the gas chambers were used and how many prisoners were killed. But in this sense, Majdanek is acting as a small-scale killing center. It is tiny in comparison to what is happening in the Action Reinhard camps, in Auschwitz, etc., etc. So to finish off, during some of the research, I was interested in what the dictionary definition is of an extermination camp or a death camp. So I looked at the Cambridge Dictionary. It defines an extermination camp, death camp, as a place where a large number of people are sent to be killed or kept as prisoners until they die from the extremely bad conditions. The problem with that definition is so widely drafted that any Jew in any ghetto, prison camp, labor camp, concentration camp, extermination camp would fall under this definition. So it doesn't make it particularly helpful. I then had a look at the fountain of all knowledge, well, for some people, Wikipedia, and it defines a death or extermination camp as the victims of death camps were primarily murdered by gassing, either in permanent installations constructed for this specific purpose or by the gas vents. And it names the 6 extermination camps. And this is actually what is used in almost all the history books and on the internet. These are the 6 extermination camps. Interesting enough, USHMM, the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, no longer includes Majdanek as an extermination camp. When I looked at this, and then I looked at the research, particularly in relation to Minsk and Riga, when I look at Minsk and Riga, they are as much killing centers as Auschwitz, much smaller scale, but they are the same principle. In Minsk and Riga, there were transports to Minsk and Riga, already Jews existing there, Jews brought in from the surrounding areas. The unproductive are put to death, the productive are put to work. This is Auschwitz, no different. Auschwitz, much bigger scale, but it's the same, exactly the same model as in Minsk and Riga. So, for me, it is a problem, the current definition, because it completely excludes the Soviet Union. This definition of what an extermination camp only relates to occupied Poland. There's nothing to do with the Soviet Union. So, I propose new definitions. For me, in terms of the final solution, there are only 4 extermination camps. Kulmhof, Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka. These camps exist for the sole purpose of killing. They are not combined labor camps and killing camps. They exist solely for the purposes of killing. I would also include, it's a different program, but I would also include the mercy killing centers, the mercy killing in the Altreich, so Bernburg, Brandenburg, Grafeneck, Hadamar, Hartheim, Sonnenstein. These are extermination camps. The word tells you what it means. So, I think we also need an additional definition, what I call a killing center. And a killing center is an extermination camp, but it also acts as a huge labor camp. And in the labor camp, you have what is called Vernichtung durch Arbeit. You work people to death. So, in terms of the definition of a killing center, as I said, this operates as an extermination camp, but it also acts as a huge labor camp where people are worked to death, Vernichtung durch Arbeit. So, this is exactly the model in Auschwitz. There are transports to the camp, you select the productive, you put them to work, you kill the rest. This is the same model in Riga and Minsk. Smaller basis, but it's the same model. Why have Riga and Minsk been excluded? Because of the fixation about gas. It comes back to this whole thing when the Soviets liberated Majdanek and Auschwitz about creating a narrative. Those cold, calculating Germans with their science and engineering expertise, building gas chambers and using gas. The fixation from that time has been on extermination camps that use gas. Minsk and Riga are the same model, except they don't use gas, they use shooting as the mass killing method. So they should be defined as killing centers. And this would allow us to give us a much more encompassing understanding of what the Holocaust is. Because currently the Soviet Union is excluded. We only cover the what I call the killing centers in occupied Poland. Majdanek probably should be included as a killing center, although it is on a much smaller basis. It's also possible, Chelmno ghetto and camps, where they did shooting in Fort 9, Fort 4, and Fort 7, also acts as a killing center. Similarly, Vilna ghetto. Some of the others probably not. Bialystok and Lvov, they send the Jews to be killed to the Action Reinhard camps. But this, to me, if we had this separate definition, would give a much better understanding to people of what the Nazis' final solution was. Okay. Conclusions. The Nazis murdered using poison gas approximately 17% of the 17.4 to 18 million victims the Nazis murdered during the Second World War. As I mentioned, poison gas was primarily aimed at the Jews, the mentally and physically disabled, and to a lesser extent the Sinti and Roma. Why? Because of the psychological effects on the killers of killing women with children, babies, old, sick, the mentally and physically disabled. The adult mercy killing program in the Altreich was the only centralized program the Nazis ran. And even that failed, as we saw from what happened in East Prussia and Pomerania. Those Gaus were German before the war and were subject to T4, yet the Gauleiter, in consultation with Himmler, just decided to do their own thing. So the tendency of the Nazi regime is pretty clear from that. Functionalism. This is regional and functionalist. The local administrators, the local organizers, they have their own way to do things, given general ideas coming out of Berlin. We also see from the killing of the mentally and physically disabled in occupied Poland, these were Poles, not Germans. For the Germans, they didn't care. Just bury them. You don't even particularly have to bother about secrecy. We see, in terms of who's targeted under the killing programs, beginning with the adult mercy killing program, Jews are always targeted. All the way through. You see it in the adult mercy killing program. You see it in the 14F13 program. You see it in Heydrich's order of July 41 to the Einsatzgruppen to select communists and other resistors, but all Jews from the Soviet POW camps. It's obvious. And it comes back to what I say. I don't think the Nazis needed to issue a central order for the final solution. It was regional anyway, as we saw from what happened in the Varteland. This is a regional application to implement the final solution, and it's implemented regionally. What you see all the way through this is ideology mixed with economics. So beginning with the adult mercy killing program all the way through, the Nazis are targeting Jews, mentally and physically disabled, and the Sinti and Roma, but it's also about productivity. They want to keep the productive to work, at least until they work. Comes back to Vernichtung durch Arbeit, killing through work. In terms of, there's been too much fixation about gas, in my opinion. Less than 50% of the Jews killed in the final solution were killed using gas. A large number were killed using shooting. So that fixation on gas, as I explained, has come out of the end of the war, the Soviets liberating Majdanek and Auschwitz, etc. And that is stuck to this day. You ask anybody who is not a historian or directly interested in this, what is the Holocaust? They will say Auschwitz. Yet Auschwitz only accounts for approximately 16% of the victims in terms of gas. And it comes back again to my, what I would propose is a revised definition we should be using, which is to separate out the pure extermination camps, of which there are only 4, Kulmhof and the 3 Action Reinhard camps, and a separate definition of a killing center, because a killing center is not just an extermination camp, it is Vernichtung durch Arbeit, and the concentration on the 6 extermination centers you read about in all the history books or on the internet is in some ways a distortion of the Holocaust. Thank you.
So thank you, Cameron, for this tour de force through this very, very difficult subject. I would like to point out 1 or 2 things, and if you have questions, just already have them in mind. But I have 1 or 2 questions myself too. But one thing I have to point out, because it's very, very much concentrating, of course, on the logic of the perpetrators, and this utilitarian language is, we must keep in mind, this is their language. So if we are saying this is, so there, it must be pointed out. And if you want to have some more balance and also have the point of view of the victims, then please visit our exhibition, which is right here, and come back anytime, because it's very, very important to say that we knew it from the start that this is going to be about Nazi killing methods, and it's very important to say here. So this is a very, very utilitarian view of looking at things. It's interesting you pointed out at the very beginning that why there was this huge concentration on Majdanek, which is probably a misunderstanding. They thought it was a huge extermination camp, but it wasn't, but it was called that even in school books in the 1970s and 80s. Because they were liberated or because they were discovered by the Soviet army when they intact, and there were also survivors from these places, because from Treblinka you had maybe 60 survivors who survived to the end of the war. From Belzec, I think 1 or maybe none. So there were no people to talk about this. So that's a very important thing. One more thing I want to say is in our exhibition we also have the room of sights. And I remember, because I worked here as a guide from the very beginning after opening the memorial in 2005. And in the room of sites, we show 8 exemplary, the most important sites of extermination. And we also made this categorization, if you say so, that the extermination camps is at Chelmno, Kulmhof, Sobibor, Belzec, Treblinka are extermination sites set up only for the sole purpose of killing people in a very, very short time. Auschwitz is a hybrid mixture. Majdanek we included because it's so symbolic, even though we make it clear in the text that it's a very, very complicated place. And also we included Babi Yar is a symbol of the mass shootings, because 33,000 people were killed there in 48 hours. And Mali Trostnets, which was the odd one out because no one has known it before. So I remember many people had heard, everybody heard about Auschwitz, but many, many people have never heard about Treblinka. Only a small percentage ever about Sobibor, and Mali Trostnets we really had to explain. And I had to learn about it too. Later I ended up being curator of an exhibition on Mali Trostnets. So thank you very much for including it. One more thing was about Mali Trostnets, which was always a misunderstanding. People think it's an extermination camp. It's much more complicated than that. It was an extermination site. People were taken to the Blagovščina forest. There over 40,000 of them were shot. There was also 5 kilometers away a small labor camp, but it was really small, and it was a strange place because sometimes even civilians from the surrounding villages went into there and worked there. So that was a very, very strange place too. Anyway, I talked enough now. You talked a lot too. Are there any questions from the audience?
Coming back to your interesting definition in the end, so I find it convincing to get away from killing methods to a more functional understanding of this distinction between killing site and extermination camps. But maybe could we get this one slide back? That would be helpful, I think. But my question, thank you very much. My question, however, would be if we do have even this new distinction, so what do we learn from it? So if we take, for example, a comparison and ask about the use of gas vans. So we have it in Kulmhof, of course. We have it to a far smaller extent, also, if I'm right, to a little extent in Riga and also in Minsk and these areas. So how come this about? So what's actually behind these differences? Is this just local initiatives, different ones? Is it like the difference in you would have the local Jewish population of the Wartegau killed in Kulmhof, and then some rather regional approach with also German Jews, for example, being deported to Riga and Minsk? So do we have some explanations that bring us a little bit further, or do we just have a whole lot of different places that we just by force,
The Nazi regime and what it does is highly functional. There's general ideas come out of Berlin. Okay, the SS are slightly different with Himmler, but generally there's big ideas come out of Berlin, but it's left to the local administrator, Gauleiter, Reichskommissar, in conjunction with the SS, to organize it themselves. And you see that in the different killing methods. If this was all centralized and controlled out of Berlin, presumably they'd be using Zyklon B everywhere. You know, why use gas fans? Why use exhaust gases? I mean, it's a wholly functional system. And the Nazis sort of make it up as they go along. They have a general idea, probably from one of Hitler's talks, kill all the unproductive Jews, put the productive to work, certainly in the short to medium term. And you see it, that's how it works. So you see in the Soviet Union, in Minsk, Riga, they kill the unproductive to put the productive to work. You see it in the Varteland. Quite clearly in the Varteland, actually, Arthur Greiser and the administration of the Varteland make a lot of money out of the productive Jews. That's why in summer of 44, they're desperately trying to hang on to the Lodz Ghetto is under their control. And there's a fight with the SS, which I talked about in the gas fan lecture. So the way to think about this is, and I think, you know, it comes back to again, what the Soviets, the narrative the Soviets are trying to create in late 44, 45 into the Nuremberg trials and thereafter is about the cold calculating German with the science and engineering skills creating gas chambers. The inference is that this is all highly centralized and highly controlled and highly organized. In reality, it wasn't like that. It's highly regional, actually, which is how, as I say, you know, one indication of that is the different killing methods. So that's one thing. The second thing is the death camp or extermination camp, under my definition, is associated with ghettos and labor camps. The only difference between the two definitions is actually Vernichtung durch Arbeit. Another thing that is not well understood amongst the general population of the world is the Holocaust was also about Vernichtung durch Arbeit. It wasn't just extermination centers. So, for example, the project we did on the Auschwitz subcamps, this was about Vernichtung durch Arbeit. It isn't just about killing Jews immediately in the extermination camps. So unless you've got that separate definition of a killing center, including Vernichtung durch Arbeit, you're actually not probably understanding what the Nazis had in mind, which was to kill the unproductive, put the productive to work until they die. But it is a highly functional system. The nature of Hitler and the Nazi regime is not centralized from that point of view. It's highly functional. And we, as I say it again, the adult mercy killing program, even in the Altreich, in Pomerania and East Prussia, even though there's a centralized program and they're all told what to do, two Gauleiters try to do their own thing. That tells you a lot about the Nazi regime, and it isn't centralist. So I think this new definition helps because it gives a better understanding of what the Nazis were about. A, the more functional nature of the Nazi regime, but B, the general idea coming out of Berlin is, kill the unproductive. Ideologically, we want them killed. Put the productive to work until they're killed through Vernichtung durch Arbeit. And I think that that is not well understood. Obviously, historians and people who are very interested and understand it, but generally that's not understood. People think of Auschwitz as an extermination camp. It is not an extermination camp specifically. If you look at when Auschwitz came to a close, end of 44, January 45, there are more prisoners in the Auschwitz subcamps than in the main camps. You've got 45 subcamps, or thereabouts, with prisoners working. This is about Vernichtung durch Arbeit. Kill the unproductive, put the productive to work. And I think that is a better understanding of actually what the Holocaust was. It was ideology. We want to kill the Jews, the mentally physically disabled, the Sinti and Roma, but there's also a practical element. Economics at work. We were going to put them to work until they die. We're going to make money out of them, as Greiser did in the Varteland.
But I think it's an important point because taking into account the Jewish experience or the experiences of the victim, which Adam rightly put the finger in, is the spaces between, right? Or maybe you can put these two categories together and make it into a landscape of death. And into this landscape of death, for example, also belong facts like that Jews in Poland, in occupied Poland, have been not only been killed by the Germans, but also by their Polish neighbors.
Sure,
It is
of course.
estimated that around 200,000 Jews in Poland have been killed directly or indirectly because they were ratted out by the neighbors, for example,
Yep.
by Poles. And 200,000 is a number which is much higher than Krumhof or Sobibor.
Sure, I agree.
So for the Polish, for the victims' experience, a death camp was not the most important thing. It was the life that happened before. And this was characterized by a landscape of death, which started in their houses when they were forced out by violence, also sexual violence, by ghettoization, and by transports and deportations. So I think it's equally important to look at the landscape that was defined by the experiences before the death camp.
I agree, I totally agree, but this is probably something different. I'm primarily in what I'm talking about it from a Nazi point of view. I think you're absolutely correct. It would be equally as important to look at it from the victim's point of view. I've only looked at it from really from the Nazis' point of view, what's in their mind, what their general plans are, and the implementation of that. But I think you're absolutely right. It would be interesting to do this sort of work from the victims. How to change that is an interesting question. Because I think what we have at the moment is far too simplistic, and actually, you know, some historians use that. I mean, those sort of definitions, and that is far too simplistic to keep talking about the 6 extermination camps that basically came out of Nuremberg in 45 and 46.
Any more comments or questions? If not, thank you, Cameron, very much.
Thank you again for allowing me to.
And all the best to you too. And thank you, Elena and Feli, for the organization. Thank you, Jürgen Perch, for the technical stuff. And thank you for Assoziation T4 für die super spannende Reihe. Okay, thank you so much.
As always, Adam, thank you.